I'm recording this. And I direct the Texas Mindset Initiative, and I'm coming to you from the Texas Behavioral Science and Policy Institute, which is a multi-PI institute housed within the Population Research Center. And one of our core projects is the application of behavioral science and data science and so on to the improvement of higher education. And so this speaker series invites leading social scientists and also people with a variety of expertise, both in and out of administration, to help us think more clearly and in a really advanced way about how to use data and social science in order to promote inclusion and equity in higher education. And so we are very grateful to have Marco today, Dr. Marco Molinaro. And he comes to us, he's the Assistant Vice Provost for Educational Effectiveness at UC Davis, which is a very interesting job title, and I hope you tell us all about what that entails. But he has a number of important scientific accomplishments. He's been funded by Howard Hughes Medical Institute. He's served on panels, committees for the National Academies, for NSF, NIH, for the AAAS, and much more. And he came to us highly recommended from a scan we did. We said, who should UT get to talk? And so Marco was someone who said, we were told it should be at the top of our list. So Marco, we are thrilled to hear your talk, and I'll let you take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I want to invite you guys to feel free to put questions in the chat. David, if you could help me just monitor some of those as I'm talking. And also feel free to interrupt me and ask a question. I really, for me, if you prefer, we can do the I talk and then we have questions at the end, but I am also perfectly happy to have questions intermixed while I'm talking. That's perfectly fine with me. My name is Marco Molinaro, and as was mentioned, I'm Assistant Vice Provost for Educational Effectiveness here at UC Davis, and also the Director for the Center for Educational Effectiveness, which is in effect merging together what you might think of as a teaching and learning center and an educational analytics center, and trying to combine the best of both of those worlds into actually making some change happen. So I'm going to be talking to you today about our approach for fostering and supporting a data-informed student-centered institution. And I would be remiss if I wouldn't also add that we're trying very much to be an inclusive institution. So there's a strong piece here, which is also what TxMI would call inclusive excellence that we embed into our work. And we rely very much on partnerships throughout different consortia that we're part of, including Seismic, which is a 10 institution R1 partnership looking at introductory STEM. And also we very much rely on developing and working with various faculty in our scholarship of teaching and learning community, the SOLO community. Let me start to you by putting in context the kind of work that we're doing and kind of some of the behind the scenes motivation and some of the top down kind of pressures that we're facing. I'm assuming that some of these will be very familiar in your institution as well. When we looked across all of our UC schools, and the UC system has all of these schools here represented, we were looking and trying to understand what's the four-year graduation rate for our non-minoritized students versus the four-year graduation rate for our minoritized students. When we did this analysis across all of the UCs, there was a big new initiative that was put forth by our University of California Office of the President that said that by 2030, the intent is to remove all gaps in four-year graduation between minoritized and non-minoritized students, and also to increase across the board in all of our schools the four-year graduation rates. So when that data was looked at, here's where Davis came out. So our non-minoritized students were four-year graduation rate 69%, and our minoritized students graduation rate of 47%. So we were in the not so enviable position of having one of the largest gaps. I think in the data from the year after this data, I think we're no longer the worst, we're maybe the second worst, but it's a very, very small change. And so this is the context into which we situate a lot of this work, kind of the broader university context. And we decided that we needed to have an approach to thinking about data, and we developed this general, very simple approach, which has to do with thinking about data as promoting awareness, but not really getting you much farther than that, unless you built in a systemic process of working with that data. And what we did is we decided that in the past, what was happening is data would be shared with chairs, faculty, deans, provost. There would be some immediate action taken based on that data, and then they'd look again at the data, and they'd be kind of bouncing back and forth between awareness and action, awareness and action. But we never tended to stop and try to understand what the data was telling us, or what other people had already figured out who had similar data or who had done extensive research to try to understand what that data was telling you. And so we deliberately put in this kind of pause and think moment when you get the data, which we call understanding. Once you've taken in what we know from the literature, taken in some deeper questions, looked at that data, then we can move on to action. And once you've actually taken an action, embed in that action ways of measuring some outcomes, and then reflect on what you've learned. And now you start again. You're in this new awareness. And this approach, we really believe we can embed with information that's shared with individuals, with information that's shared within a, let's say, a curricular team or a department. And that can also affect the way a whole college or a whole university might work. And really stop and think, okay, we've gotten this data. What are the new questions that come from that data? What do we already know about what this data are telling us before we actually jump into action? Questions about this? And one quick thing I'll add to this is that I wish I could say that every single project I'm going to be talking to you about now has gone through this whole cycle and has been going through it many times. We, most of the time, very easy to get to awareness. We've gotten into understanding and some action. In a few situations, we've gone around the whole loop, but it's very hard to go through this whole loop. There's a lot of different barriers, and I'll be mentioning some of those. Now, the other thing that's been really important when we consider instructional effectiveness or educational improvement, however you want to call about it, but really we're talking about change. How do we make change happen? We started out with a student deficit model where we were looking at all the things that students couldn't do, all the ways that they were underprepared. We then moved on into an instructor deficit model. And you can imagine that was really popular. You know, what's wrong with you as an instructor? And what we really have settled on and are focusing on is really improving the course or the system. So what's the course system improvement model? Okay. Of course, there are challenges with the students. There could be challenges with the instructors, but that's not the focus. The focus is how do we make the system in itself work with the people who we've accepted and the people who are here. And so one of the things we've had to really think about, and this we sometimes invoke this framework for change called the 4 frames framework for change. This one really tries to understand who are the people involved in making the decisions and making the change. What are the built-in structures that in incentives that are in the system already embedded? What kind of symbolism is used? How is the data? What variables are even shared? What do we look at? And then we think about what are the power hierarchies. So it can be useful to think about some of these things here as you're thinking about approaching change or trying to understand how all of these things interact with each other. And I see how important is including the right people, stakeholders in the reflection understanding process. Pratik, great question. Very important to involve everyone. The people that tend to be left out the most are the students. So we have an easier time involving the faculty or the administrators, even some of the staff. We have a hard time involving in these decision-making processes and in these structures the students themselves. And that's something that we've been trying hard to bring in. Not always easy to do, but something we've been trying. The other thing to think about is that there are many different levels that are related with considering instructional and professional effectiveness and change. You can look at things related to the students. You can look at things related to the instructors. You can look at specifics related to course, department, college, campus, even professional societies and the messages that they're sending about what the curriculum should look like. We tend to focus in kind of the instructor to the department, beginning of college. This is kind of like beginning of the college structures. This is the area that we focus the most on. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to launch off into 3 different very specific examples. One aimed at the college university leadership level, one aimed at kind of the departmental leader level, and one at the faculty level. And I want to stress that we try very hard as we're developing tools or approaches to make sure that they have the ability to scale. So I'm assuming from everything I know about UT Austin, you guys are a very large institution, even larger than us. And you have a lot of different things going on. And the reality is if you build something useful, you don't want it to take 10 years to then make it useful to the whole campus. So we do have a prototype kind of approach, and then we try to make sure that as we're designing that prototype, we're thinking about scale. And really we're trying to affect individual actions all the way up to systems and structures. So let me start at the big picture. So I don't know about you, but on our campus, there has been a lot, there was for many, many years, discussion of how do our first generation students do compared to our non-first generation students do? How do our low income students do compared to the non-low income? How about the minoritized versus non-minoritized? And what we were always seeing is about a third of a GPA gap. That's kind of what we saw on average. And so people thought, okay, well, a third of a GPA gap, that's not so bad. You know, it's okay. And it's about the same for all these factors. So it's probably, you know, that we're kind of comfortable with that. It's not horrible. We'd like to improve it, but it's not that imperative. Well, what we decided to do is do intersections of a variety of these factors. And so one of the first things that we did in trying to impact the way the overall university thinks about this and our leadership thinks about this is we looked at what is the overall GPA after the first year of our students that are not first generation or low income in red, not, well, first gen or low income here in this bluish color, and first generation and low income in this kind of yellowish orange color. And we saw a clear distinction. And by the way, the size here is the number of students in that category. And in this case, we're looking at only California entering freshman students. And this is about 80% of our entering class. And you'll see later why we're looking at only the California students. What we saw down here is we did the same kind of analysis, but we only looked at the grade point averages of the highest enrollment courses. So we looked at the top 10 enrollment courses for first year California resident students, which happens to be 8 introductory STEM courses taught in the 150 to 600 student range, and introductory psychology also taught very large, and introductory English taught very small. And what we saw there was when we looked at the grades in those courses, I don't know if you can notice that, but everything's been spread out and lowered. Okay, so now we're looking at the difference between our not first gen, not low income students having an average around 3.0 versus around 2.4 for our first gen and low income students. So this was the very beginning of looking at some of these intersections. Does this make sense? Are there questions about this graph? Because a lot of other graphs depend on this one making sense to you. Any questions? So we decided to break this up now by race and ethnicity. And I'd love to hear just either in the chat or you can unmute yourself. What do you see now when we do this? Any first observations, any thoughts of what might be happening?
Okay, thanks.
Anything that you notice from the data? Feel free to just speak up or write something in the chat.
The first thing that jumps out at me is the circles are really small for Black African American,
Okay.
and then the white Caucasian, first gen, and low income. Yeah.
So you're looking at this kind of the size of the population. So now you start to get a sense of the distribution of the population within our campus, right? And one thing you quickly notice is what you pointed out, the Black African American population is fairly well distributed into the 3 groups and small, as is the first gen low income white population. The largest population, the white population, is the population that's not first gen or low income. In the Asian population, we kind of have, it's not totally an equal distribution because there's still more not first gen, not low income. In our Hispanic population, it's predominantly first gen and low income, right? That's a big difference that we see. Anything else that people see they want to mention?
We've got some comments in the chat as well.
So, intersectional differences by SES. Yep. Okay. Also, disparities by SES are present for every group, but different for Latinx versus white in terms of location of the middle group in blue. Yeah. So you're still seeing the Black population, the Hispanic population drop as a whole, right? They're dropping in terms of these GPA outcomes. And the other thing I notice is that that drop is much more prominent in these top 10 enrollment courses. So those heavy introductory STEM piece that we have here at our institution, and we've done other research, of course, is a major contributor in bringing down the GPA of our students, okay? So we could have left it here, right? Had we left it here, some of the stories that we heard, luckily not dominant stories, but some of the stories we heard is, oh, this is clear. You should not be accepting first-gen low-income students. I mean, come on, they're not doing very well. Don't accept them. Or maybe we should have, really just focus on the first-gen, not low-income, our more privileged Hispanic and Black students. That's who we should be accepting. Well, these were not acceptable situations. We are accepting the top students by region in our state, and our university is already fortunate enough to get the top 6 to 8% of the students. So these are California. Okay, this is who we should be accepting, and these outcomes are not what we want to see. So what we did is we paired with another data source that we had on our campus called the Regional Opportunity Index. And what this does is it takes information about specific individual census tracts within California. And it looks at an indicator, a built indicator of people data and of place data. And this is what our state looks like. And the colors here, this is the people indicator and this is the place indicator. The colors tell you red is very low opportunity and the green is higher opportunity. And so what you might have heard about Central Valley in California, a lot of the Central Valley in California has a very a migrant population as well as a heavily Hispanic population. And there's not a lot of opportunity in those areas. And then in terms of in our San Francisco area, you've got mostly green, and we happen to be here in California and mostly green with a little bit of yellow around us. And so we looked at these metrics. These metrics have been developed for regional development, believe it or not. And we took this metric and we tied it back to our California resident students. We made one big assumption. We made the assumption that the address they gave us as their permanent address had some impact on their K-12 schooling. We don't really know if it's 6 months, if it's their whole life that they were there, but we made the assumption that that had some impact, and likely if they would have just recently moved, they probably moved from a similar region of opportunity. And so when we did that, we get this. So now we've added a dimension here. The dimension here is the average opportunity, regional opportunity index value based on their permanent address. Oh, yes, David, I think you probably should do something similar if you can. And I'll show you how you can do that with a different metric, because this is a California specific metric. But I want you to tell me, what do you see now when you add this measure of opportunity? Average opportunity, you got average opportunity, average outcome. What do you see here? What's something that might stick out?
One of the things that sticks out to me is just the incredible strength of the opportunity relationship with outcomes. It is overpowering everything else. It just pushes everybody into a diagonal.
Yeah, so one way that I sometimes say it is UC Davis has done a very good job of maintaining prior opportunity after their first year of courses here. And people listen to that and they're like, oh, wait, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And it's not the image that we sell ourselves, right? The image we sell ourselves is an engine of increasing opportunity, of changing the opportunity measures for people that are coming in. And what you see here in this case is that on average, we're pretty much maintaining the prior opportunity after the first year, okay? Which is not something that we can feel very excited about. Effectively maintained inequality. Yeah, thank you, David. Institutions mostly serve to reduce prior inequality rather than being a menu for upward mobility. Yes, exactly. Now, there are UC-wide studies that show what great engines of mobility we are, of social mobility we are. And for the people that are able to stick through and finish, we do provide opportunity. It's clear, but there's a lot of people that don't make it to that point. Okay, but they're still here and they're about to leave. Okay, but this is what we see here. And for me, a sad element is that when I think about the majority, you look at this lower quadrant of both outcomes and of opportunity, and you have on average the majority of our Black population, a large proportion of our Hispanic population, smaller proportion of our Asian, and a very small proportion of our white students. And that just doesn't sit right. So I just want to point out that, you know, you have a regional opportunity does not mean that you have a stamp on your head that says this is how the GPA you're going to get, right? Individuals can break out of this mold in both directions. You can come from low opportunity, have great GPA outcomes. You can come from high opportunity and have low GPA outcomes. But the general trend, even when you look at these colors, is to aggregate into clusters, okay, on average. Now, we were able to do the same thing with multiple universities. So through Seismic, we were able to look at 3 UC schools. And when we look at 3 UC schools, here's one campus, campus B, C, D, campus B, C, D, campus B, C, D. And what you end up seeing here is that we tend to have fairly similar populations, fairly similar. Some institutions have a few more white students compared to the others. Some of them have more Asian students compared to others, but we're roughly similar, more similar than you'll see at a lot of other institutions I'm going to show you in a moment. And you see that 2 of our institutions out of the 3 compared are very, very similar, but a third one seems to be doing better, especially when it comes to the top 10 enrollment courses. And all we know so far about the institution that's doing better is they don't emphasize STEM as much in their top enrollment courses. So they have a greater emphasis on also humanities courses. They're still large, but humanities courses, and you know, there's a philosophy course and there's a mythology course that's also part of their large enrollment courses. So STEM, those big introductory STEM courses, when very heavily emphasized, tend to be the ones that are bringing down the overall outcomes of the students. And when you think about that, that has an impact on a student's sense of belonging. It likely has an impact on, you know, the narrative they tell themselves as to whether they belong at the institution. So it may not be the best solution to bombard students with a great deal of STEM unless your goal is to get rid of them. And I'll show you in a moment some other things. But first, I want to show you that you guys too at Texas can do it. You can use something called the Opportunity Atlas, and you can find the Opportunity Atlas here. The Opportunity Atlas is a little bit of a, we use a measure called KIR within the Opportunity Atlas, which is a measure of income potential based on census tract. And when we did that, we're comparing now one UC with University of Michigan and University of Indiana Bloomington. Now you have Campus A and Campus E, which are non-UCs, and using that KIR value, which is written here, which value we're using. And when you see that, you kind of see a similar idea. It doesn't have the same breadth because it's more of an income potential measure. And there's the possibility within the Opportunity Atlas to create a more complex variable, but it's just a pretty involved procedure, so we haven't done that. But you can see that at all of our institution, kind of a measure of your prior opportunity is affecting your outcome. You can also see that in those other institutions, they are heavily, heavily white serving compared to our institution. And one of the 2 institutions basically doesn't get or doesn't accept very many first-gen and low-income students, period. There's just very few, especially in their Latinx population or in their Black population. They also have small populations in those groups. And it's just to show you that what we've started to see is that this pattern of outcome related to prior opportunity is a highly relevant one in many of our public institution contexts, which I'm not going to claim, wow, this is an amazingly shocking outcome. It's just, for us, it's been important to show that this is what the data show, you know, and have that conversation so that we can try to do something about it. Okay, the other thing that we did kind of institution-wide is try to understand who leaves and when do they leave. First thing that we looked at, who makes it in the first 2 years, you know, who leaves within the first 2 years. And what we see is about 14% of our Black students leave within the first 2 years. Almost 12% of our Latinx students leave within the first 2 years. 5% of our Asian students and 8% of our white students. When we break it out into not first gen or low income, first gen or low income, first gen and low income, and this is when we don't know one or both factors, we see a progression. The more of these factors you have, the more likely you are to leave. And if I show you the numbers by the width of the bar, you see that really because of our population at Davis, at UC Davis, the vast majority of the loss in terms of actual people is our first gen low income Hispanic students. So these are the students we are predominantly losing. We're losing 14% of them, and we have a lot of them. So that means 264 students in a three-year cohort, three cohort group. So we also see that our Black students, the vast majority of them are the first gen low income students that are lost. We lose 1 in 5 of our first gen low income Black students. And you see that the other groups where we have the largest numbers lost happen to be our white and our Asian populations that are not first gen or low income. These, so far, we're in the process of doing the National Student Clearinghouse work so we can see where these students have gone. But what we know a little bit of so far is that a lot of these students are what I might call upgrading, going to an institution they believe has higher prestige or is giving them a better deal or, has more of what they want. But it's just interesting. You see the dichotomy of who is leaving. Of course, we wanted to know when were people leaving, and we're a quarter-based school, so we have 3 quarters in a year. So this would be the first quarter, fall, winter, and then spring. And what we see is that our first year is, again, the predominant time when people leave, but people do leave in the second year as well. This first year and this time, really the first 4 or 5 quarters are when you're getting that heavy load of your intro calculus, intro chemistry, intro biology. That's when you're getting a lot of those types of courses. And a lot of those courses seem to be having disproportionate contributions to these departures. The other thing that we get asked all the time, well, didn't the people who leave, weren't they just poor academic performers? And when we look at that, those who stayed versus those who left, we do see that those who leave the curve is shifting to the left. They're not doing as well in their first year GPA, but we have plenty of students that are doing a 1.8 or better, that there's no reason that they couldn't be helped and stay. There's plenty of work that can be done directly with those students to help them stay. And there's still, plenty of students that have a 2.8 or better, that are leaving. Why should they leave? And we're losing the Hispanic students. We're losing students of all types, but we're losing a lot of those first gen low income Hispanic students are being lost, even though they have, they're in that C to B range, right? There's still a lot of things that could be done. So we think that that's very important, and it's kind of shaped some of the conversations and where we're focusing our efforts. Now I'm going to move on to what we're doing at the department college level. And there it's really about, of course, promoting awareness and beginning to give some understanding with the intention of trying to focus resources. So the prior part with the kind of institution-wide picture, that was really to build an understanding and an empathy for the students, and understanding that the students that we're accepting, we're not doing the same by all of them. There's variation in how things are happening, what's happening with them. Here it's trying to help our college leaders and our department leaders think about where they focus resources. So one of the first things we did, we built, this is the ribbon tool. For those, some of you may have used this tool before. It's just ribbon.ucdavis.edu. This allows you to look at progression. So this was a cohort in statistics, and this many students started in statistics, and lo and behold, 4 years later, every student has turned into 3.5 students in terms of graduating in statistics. Great. So where did they come from? What happened? Well, these are the ones that left between the first year and the second year. These are the ones that joined. Where did they come from? Oh, a lot of them come from managerial economics and from economics. They come into statistics. Okay, great. What's happening at the fall of their fourth year? Well, only a lot of them haven't graduated yet, but by the beginning of the 5th year, so really by the end of their 4th year, many of them have graduated and some are still enrolled. But where did they go? So this was to get around the numbers that most department leaders were seeing, which had to do with the number of incoming students they had and the number of graduates they had. Okay, so someone like statistics would get, you have a 350% retention rate. No, you do not have a 350% retention rate. you have migration coming in, you have other things happening, and we could see that things like in certain departments, you might have a 20% retention rate, so this allowed the conversation to go deeper, and this tool allows you to separate this by other demographic variables if you'd like, and you can try to understand if the patterns are different for different groups. So that fostered a certain type of conversation. We also have been doing things like this, where we look very specifically at what we call our common goods courses. So these are a concept that I've been working to instantiate here at the campus, which thinks about, I don't know how your program review works at your institution. Our institution, our programs are reviewed every 7 years. And when a program is reviewed, they look at all their courses and the outcomes of those courses and what's happening with their graduates. But there's very little attention paid to those early service courses that a department might be teaching, because that's not the emphasis. The emphasis is on the majors in that molecular biology department. It's not the majors that took the intro course that you're teaching in biology, right? Because it's a different set. And so what we did here is we showed what is the enrollment, and I've taken away the specific course, but these are all different courses. What is the first and second year enrollment in those courses? What's the total enrollment in those courses? How many minoritized first-gen low-income students are you taking? What's the average grade gap between the minoritized first-gen low-income and the non-minoritized non-first-gen non-low-income? How many students are receiving failing grades? How popular is the summer? What's the main term class size? How big are these classes on average taught? And then what percent of the students in the course actually belong to the discipline of the course? And in this case, a chemistry course in our campus belongs to the math and physical sciences discipline. But that course only serves 9% of students that have a major in the math and physical science discipline. That means that 91% are not seeking a math or physical science major. So does this mean that the course should only cater to the math and physical science majors, which tends to be the way that these courses are viewed? I would say no. I would argue this is a common goods course. It needs to take into consideration the needs of the biology students, the needs of the animal science students, the need of some of our ag students. But that's not the way things are structured. So this is trying to get some more awareness and thought into, can we develop interdisciplinary approaches to thinking about those introductory courses? Okay. Lately, we're also looking at the complexity, and this is something called curricular analytics. You can find this at curricularanalytics.org. This is looking at, if we think about the courses that are required for a major, and we think about the prerequisite chains in those courses, how complex is a curriculum that's been set up? So this is for a BS in psychology. It has none of the general education courses in here. It has none of the electives in here. This is only the courses that are mandated to be taken for that major. And we see, when we measure the dependencies, like the longest chain here is introductory psychology, that brings you to research methods, then brings you to cognitive, that brings you to statistical analysis, and then brings you to statistical analysis part 2. And so this chain says that if you don't pass introductory psychology, there's 4 courses down the road and many other courses that you can't take, right? And it creates a measure of complexity. So you look at animal science, this one now almost has double the complexity, and now it has a chain that starts, the course that has the longest chain is introductory chemistry. And that has a chain where it has other 5 courses down the chain that you have to pass before you're able to complete this. And then we look at a chemistry BS, and now that's also doubled again in complexity in terms of the pathways that they've created. And their most complex path is actually calculus. It has nothing to do with chemistry. Okay, calculus is the limiting factor that limits the pathway through this whole curriculum. And then we look at something like chemical engineering, and now we're in an incredibly complex value. And you see that actually the most dominant course is introductory calculus. That introductory calculus sets off a chain of, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. So that's exactly 4 years worth of curriculum, right? That's exactly 4 years. You have to get everything right. All those courses have to be offered in those terms. for you to make it through this curriculum. You don't have a choice, right? So this is a much more complex curriculum that's like a locked in step and doesn't allow much flexibility. So we've been doing this analysis now, and we're doing it for all 100 majors, which some majors come with 7 variants. So we've been looking at that and trying to understand, how does the complexity interact with what our students coming in already have? Because this is assuming that you're already calculus level ready at the high level engineering calculus. We have students that come in that need to take pre-calculus, some that even need to take geometry or algebra. So there's no way that that student either could never get into this path or would never, ever graduate in 4 years. It's impossible, okay? And again, we're not even looking here at the dependencies, because some courses are only taught 1 out of 3 quarters of the year. So you mess that up, you're behind by a year. So we've been looking and trying to understand this, and trying to understand, the goal now is to understand, how is the complexity relating to the outcomes and who can actually succeed in those programs. We're trying to have some sense, make some sense out of that. And then we also look at things like, and this is using the same color schemes that we were looking at before. We're looking at kind of a progression over time. Here's an introductory chemistry course. Here's an introductory economics course. Here's an introductory psychology course. What do the patterns of outcomes for different groups of people look like in different parts of our university? And what you see is introductory chemistry, gaps are much larger based on those intersecting factors. Compared to economics, economics tends to have suppressed grades, because they're looking for a specific curve grading approach that has a average grade of, a B-. And then you look at psychology and you see over time, psychology is actually, grades keep getting better and they're kind of compressing. So this is what I call the COVID bump that showed up in some of our STEM courses. In that 2020 year, there was a boost of generosity and flexibility in assessment, and things moved up. Some people might say there was a boost also in inappropriate behaviors by students, and that also contributed to the boost. I'm sure it's a combination of things. But we're looking at progression so that departments can look at this and try to understand how they're progressing in comparison to other parts of the campus, and can kind of look at their own curriculum. So we provide this type of information at the level of every course. And I'll show you one of the places where we provide that. Okay, last area, faculty focused. So here we built something called Know Your Students. And Know Your Students is a prototype effort that was funded by our Howard Hughes Medical Institute Inclusive Excellence Project. Sorry, new one. And what it did is it said, individual faculty have very little access to information about their own students in the classes they're teaching. So we're going to try to figure out a way to give them a range of information, connect them to student voices and information from our teaching and learning side, and provide them some tools that'll help them reflect on what's happening in their class. So we built this dashboard, which right now is overly complicated. I'll be the first to say we're trying to simplify right now. We're trying to make things much, much simpler. But it gives you as an instructor, for any course that you have taught or are about to teach, it gives you the information on class size, number of transfer students, academically distressed, repeaters, the experience of your students with your campus, multilingual learners, first-gen minoritized low-income students, first-generation students, low-income students, minoritized students, international, and female. Now, it only gives you aggregate information. It only gives you information for groups of 10 or more, unless it's already information that's given to naturally, like majors of students, things of that nature. You can open up any one of these and look at every time that you've taught. It gives you the metrics for all the times that you've taught that class. It also shows you the metrics for all the offerings your department is given of that same class. And it shows you if there's multiple offerings of the class in this given term that you're looking at, it'll show you the metrics for those terms as well, for those instances as well. You can then say, oh, I think, I want to know how my students did in this other course that it's either a prerequisite or I think is important to my course. You can type in up to 5 courses and see the related course grades and how long ago those courses were taken. and how well the students did. Did they take the course a year ago or more, or less than a year ago? So you can get a sense of the types of courses that students have taken, how many have taken it. You can see the experience of your students, whether they're first year students or whether they're transfer students. How many quarters have they been on our campus? So do they know about things, or are they very new to our campus? You can look at things like their major and level. What is the unit and course load of your students? So one of the things we saw during the pandemic is many students, a normal load is 15 units. Many students were taking 20, 22, 24, 7 or 8 courses rather than the usual 4. So we saw that there were some problems there, and that was relevant to the faculty. We think about what are the most popular concurrent courses, what are the most popular courses taken in the prior term. And then there's information about the grade distributions that you've given out every time you've taught this course. And if you do the appropriate training, you can also see the outcome differences, for example, here for transfer students every single time you've taught, or for minoritized versus non-minoritized, or gender, or multilingual students. You can see all those things for you, okay? And none of this information is shared with anybody else. It's for you. You are welcome to share it with whoever you want to share it, but it is not something that's like your chair is looking at or anything like that. This is really for your own knowledge. And lately we've added those bubble charts, what I call bubble charts, that show that first gen low income and intersectionalities with race. But this shows it for all the offerings of the course in a given year. So it's not just your offerings. It's not separable by your offerings versus other offerings, but it gives you a sense of what are the patterns that are happening in your course, or what is the total lack of patterns that are happening in your courses. So it shows you that type of information. And what we've also added are some tools, experimental tools. One of them during these COVID times, we could take your transcript from your Zoom courses, and we could show you how much you spoke versus how much did other people speak, how many other people spoke in your class. We could show you the type of language you used. We could show you the complexity, the speed of your speech, and give you some basic information. So if you think you're a very interactive instructor, but then you come back and in that 50-minute session, you spoke 48 minutes, then you might develop a different sense of your own level of interaction with the students. Now that we're moving back to in-person instruction again, we measure audio levels. So we have a tool that we can use in collaboration with San Francisco State University called DART, D-A-R-T. And that tool can measure basically no noise, single voice, many voices. So it can give you a sense of how much interaction or how much group work might you have done in your class. And we can also take your grade book, and you can see, based on a variety of different demographic characteristics, again, limited to groups of 10 or more, if your midterms or your homework or any of the points that you've distributed in your course advantage one group over another, just on pure outcomes. There's a lot of interpretation that needs to be done there, but based on pure outcomes, they do that work. The other thing that we've done now lately is we've created a course, so that if you want to have access to the demographic differences in your course, you want to have access to some of that information that involves other factors like thinking about the low income and thinking about minoritized status, thinking about race. We've created a course that gives you the basics of FERPA, gives you the basics of if you're interested in IRB type work, but also gives you a context of the university, similar to what you saw earlier, that puts in context our students' outcomes based on some demographic characteristics and based on their prior opportunity. And we expect you to go through this course in about 30 to 45 minutes. And once you've passed that, you can have access to the Know Your Students tool in its full entirety. Right now, we have about 1,000 to 1,100 faculty that have access to the basic version of the tool, and we have about 60 that have access to the full. And we're trying to figure out a way to give more faculty the full access, but we don't want to fuel their biases. So we're trying really hard to we've created this course. In the past, the 60 that already have access, we did one-on-one training for over an hour to an hour and a half with each person, but we just don't have the capacity to do that. And so we're trying to see if this course can help us get there. So with that said, I will stop sharing and invite your thoughts, comments, questions. Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Yes, Deborah.
Hi there. This seems extremely useful. What has been the know your students part? I mean, the whole talk has been really interesting, but the know your students tool, what has been the reception?
So we, let me get rid of this here for a second. So the reception so I think of it two different ways. During COVID, we did something that dramatically enhanced the value of the tool and the perception of the tool. Okay. Because what happened during COVID is that faculty had a really hard time gauging how many students were available at a given time zone, what their technological challenges were, what their personal challenges might be in engaging in the course. So what we did is we made a campus-wide survey that students answered once, and then all the specific information would get fed into the individual courses through the Know Your Students tool. So you would know specifically for your class, what percentage of your students have problems accessing, with video, or are having some technical challenges, or are having to take care of a partner or a spouse or children, or having to take care of an elder person that had COVID. So we created a communication approach that allowed the students to only have to give the information and update the information once per quarter, and then it could automatically be disseminated. That dramatically increased from at the time, about 60 users. It went to, within one term, it went from 60 users to about 700 users. Now, in part, it was because they were missing information. This was a way for them to get that connection with the students who they were only seeing like this. But also it was because there was a concerted effort to publicize it, that this tool existed, and people started wondering what they could get from it. And then we've had steady growth. So we've gone, after that big, huge jump, we've grown like 100, 150 each quarter thereafter. And now we're trying to figure out how to get the maximal utility. So what we're trying to do is take all the data that you saw and condense it into like the top 3 or 4 things that might be the easiest to act upon. So we have to do a little bit of processing of what the data is for your class, and then come up with a way, what are the primary things? Like, for example, if you happen to have a high proportion of students that are new to the campus, chances are very good that they don't know about tutoring services or things of that nature. So we would prioritize that information. And then if you want to go to level 2, you'd get the full dashboards. But we're trying to create a level 1 that's much more digestible. So hopefully that answers your question, at least partially. Kristen?
I think maybe you just answered my question, but I'll ask it anyway, which is, I was wondering if that Know Your Students tool came with suggestions for how faculty might respond depending on the results. So I think you just said that, you're working on that.
But I will tell you, we try to just say, here's how many transfer students you have, and here's a link to all the resources we have about transfer students, how to work with transfer students. We even made the teaching and learning side of our center made a condensed, like, colorful 2-page thing that you could read with some quick ideas. Very little use, very little traction. So even that barrier seemed to be, here's one link, you can go one layer in and get this information, seemed to be too much. So I think what we've been thinking is we're going to try something a little bit more outward facing that kind of has the basic suggestion right up front, and then makes it very easy to link to the additional information. So I don't think the barrier is still too high. And so we're trying to simplify that. If that makes any sense. I can tell you that just having the information there and having it linkable is not enough.
Yeah. Well,
Kyle? Oh, can't hear you, sorry. Oh, for some reason your audio is not working. Is anyone else hearing him? If you want, you can put your question in the chat.
Oh, we'll have Amazon deliver a new microphone to your house. Be there in 5 minutes. So Marco, I had a question. the tool that looked at persistence rates by course, is there a way to look at it by instructor? And could that be used to identify instructors that are bright spots? So who have an exceptional ability to retain certain groups in the major. And there's a little modeling you'd have to do, like you'd want some like partial pooling or like Bayesian prior, so you're not overfitting the data, you know, because there's a ton of variation with small groups and lots of professors. But anyway, I'm just curious if you have built in the instructor level as a way to figure out who to talk to, who's like doing a good job.
So it's interesting you asked that question. We're working on a proposal right now through the Seismic Collaborative with 4 other institutions to figure out how to identify bright spots. So you use the word in the same way that we're using it. And we're trying to figure out how to identify spots where courses that appear to be working, and we're trying to figure out how to think about instructor effects. And I'd be delighted to talk to you more about it.
Yeah, we did that with we pulled 10 years of institutional data and then did survival curves.
Yeah, so we've pulled 10 years of institutional data. We looked at we did this thing called a Oaxaca analysis that was looking at the variability of impact of the instructor, and what we saw was that it was in our courses that have the biggest challenges, we do not have enough data for the instructors because there's a lot of temporary people that are brought in to teach a lot of our introductory courses. So in some courses, we could kind of monitor where the variability was very much about the instructor dependent, variability in outcomes of students. And in other places, we just didn't have enough data. So I'd love to hear more about the way you're doing it. Maybe we can have a conversation on the side and think about it.
It's the problem with any value-added score. If you don't have enough prior data, then the instructor level is too noisy.
Well, and also because a lot of those introductory courses, which are causing some of the biggest challenges, the class sizes are very, very large. The instructor pool is small and changing. And so, and that's also changed over time, right? So the course that now is taught at like 600 used to be taught at 200, 10 years ago. And so there's some of those challenges that we didn't know quite how to deal with. But I'd be very happy to talk with you more about it, and also bring Meryl Motika, who does a lot of those analyses in our group.
Yeah. So another follow-up is something Stacy asked, but Stacy had to drop off. So I assume other people have thought about this too, is what does it take to give this data to instructors? And it feels like there are almost endless numbers of ways that people could misinterpret or misuse this information.
Absolutely.
And so what's the coaching you give? And I see Jane nodding because she's the data person for TIDES. And so what's the social dynamics of the use of data so that people don't fall into stereotypes, don't make the wrong interpretations about students, and what are your norms around that?
So the main thing that we did with the Know Your Students tool, and that we also do what the general conversation about how students are doing in their first year, is we very much try to veer off of this is all dependent on your race, ethnicity, or your socioeconomics. We veer very much into has a dependency upon the opportunity that you were afforded. Opportunity that you were afforded is not an individual's characteristics. It's what they were born into. It's the opportunity that they had. And so what we've noticed is that turns on kind of an empathy circuit in folks, rather than let's figure out which group to exclude circuit. At least here, that seems to be working. And when we go into the Know Your Students tool, to be able to look at that data, what we have been doing up to now is really having that hour to hour and a half conversation, 2 of us with 1 instructor, really kind of, first of all, gauging what they think they already know about their students, then sharing their data with them and seeing how, working through with them the things that they've misunderstood or didn't know very well. And then we talk about equity versus equality. We talk about what is their role on campus to promote, the success of all students. So we have this kind of extended conversation. The challenge for us now is, does that Canvas mini course that we've created get us there as well? And I don't know the answer yet. We're piloting that this quarter. And we've got some people that are willing to pilot it and tell us kind of what happens with them. I think that we're going to get another group that signs on and wants to go through that effort of that training, but we're not going to get everyone. We're not going to get all 1,000 or 1,100 faculty that currently have gotten on to Know Your Students Basic to put in that effort to go to the next level. But if we can get a few more hundred to go to that next level, we'd be quite happy with that. What we're noticing is that slowly the culture here is building, right? To think more about what is our role in the student success and how does their prior opportunity kind of make it more challenging for some students than others. And some students are going to need additional help. They're going to need more of our time than others.
So I want to be attuned to time, but I just want to comment on one thing that feels very
And
interesting.
Kyle says he has his working
Kyle,
microphone.
are you able to talk now?
I don't think so.
Oh.
Wait, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Well, no, David, go for it. Go.
Well, let me just comment, and then since we're at time, I just want to close, but then Kyle, you can ask. This last point, though, Marco, I think suggests why there's such an important bridge between the social scientific perspective, like how do we explain disadvantage and prior achievement, right? Not just count and observe it from a data mining perspective, but how do we think about it as a causal variable? And then how does that affect how we treat people? You need a lens, but then you also need the large administrative data and present it in a way where people can digest it. And there's actually a lot of really brilliant insights that you've had about the cognitive science of seeing data that are built into your visualizations that I think are really like compelling and interesting. So that just feels like a good reminder to us of the power of combining different theoretical lenses for this work. And then the other thing is, we've thought a lot about how do you present data to people, and we've learned everything. But one thing that's been powerful is present it in the context of an ongoing relationship with someone. Like we name people fellows, for instance. And then when you share data, it's like, okay, this is part of your fellowship. And so that's just an idea we've been toying with. And so just throw that out there as something that's useful.
Yeah, there's some of these have been also called like analytics communities or learning communities for analytics. George Rary at Bloomington has been doing that type of work for several years and kind of that fellows model. There's also some models at Kansas with kind of clusters in departments that end up starting to look at a lot of this information and disseminate what they learn to the rest of their faculty. And we're trying to figure out right now how to build a community of vice chairs that are in charge of undergraduate instruction and feed them additional information to help think about, what's happening at their department level.
Yeah, great. Well, we'd love all those references. And now I'm going to just thank everyone for attending. This has been great. If there are other wonderful superstars like Marco who need to be speaking at this series in the subsequent years, please send them our way. We are taking nominations for next year's speakers for this series. But thank you so much, Marco, for your leadership, for doing this important work and all the visibility.
Thank you, Marco.
So thank you very much.
And Kyle, do you still have your question?
With that, I will let Kyle ask his question.
Yeah, my quick question should be quick. It's just how much the students really know about all of these tools that the teachers and faculty are using, because I can imagine that knowing that your instructors are trying to know you can be a really important factor of the relationship as well.
Yeah, so we have had student committees that have worked with us to help us understand, kind of the way we represent information to their faculty and things of that nature, and how if they see themselves in that. What that's led to is the development of the Student Voices Project, which when you enter into Know Your Students to begin with, you're presented with a rotation of a variety of videos, 1-minute videos from students, kind of telling you about their own experience with being in classrooms at UC Davis. So it's kind of a rotating, you get a different person every time, and they're short. And we're actually soliciting more now. We're in the process of recording more. So that's one thing that came out of that, to kind of make sure the students are always present and they're the first thing you see. You can't just jump to the data. You see the students. The other thing is we are in a project right now with our student union. Our student union leadership wanted to have a way for students every quarter to be able to express some information to their faculty so that their faculty might be a little bit more flexible on when they have study sessions, or, you know, like they want to convey to them what's the level of work that they're doing outside of school, what are some of their other responsibilities, and kind of like what we did during COVID, where we were disseminating the information about technology. This is going to be disseminating to each individual instructor, you know, 10% of your class is working, you know, Thursday and Friday nights. You know, if possible, please don't schedule your only time when you're doing your office hour Thursday or Friday night. You know, like that kind of thing, with some advice on how you, as an instructor, you might interpret the information that you're getting. So that's a joint project we're doing with the student union. And actually right now we're in the stage where we have to figure out what is also palatable for the academic senate, because the academic senate doesn't want the faculty to feel like they have to respond to the students and what the students say in these things as being their challenges. And we're trying to kind of thread that needle between how to express the students' needs and how to respect the faculty's independence in their own processes.
Yeah, and just to be clear, that I was actually talking more about how the students know that all of this process is going on. Seems really important. Just
yeah, and I think once we have this student survey piece, like that's going to be communicated directly into that. Like, this is going to your faculty. Your faculty are getting this information. This is why we're asking you for this information.
Very cool.
So I think that will be our first real mass communication of that being happening, because there hasn't been. There was during the COVID piece about the technology. So that was the starting point of that. So the students, I don't think all of them, but at least over 40% that responded has some sense that this information went somewhere to the faculty.
Right.
So now we just have to make sure we get, high numbers responding and communicate.
Cool.
Any other questions? And I know I'm meeting with some of you later in the week, so I look forward to that. And I thank you all very much. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.